All right, in this episode, we talk about rotation
and anti-rotation.
All right, Brent Porcio, Kevin Schultz here at the @TopVelocity hashtag Pitching Tips Show, where you go to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and @TopVelocity hashtag Pitching Tips. You ask your question to us on anything on pitching or anything we do here at Top Velocity. We're going to answer it here on the show. And also, would like to ask you to subscribe, share the video, and check out more of what we do at TopVelocity.net. And that'll help us keep all this going. And we're really enjoying putting this show out for you guys.
Oh yeah, one thing I would like to mention. Guys, check out the testimonials. If you can find those on the webpage and just go to them and check them out, there's tons and tons of testimonials out there that some of you probably have never seen that shows some of the guys that we've had success with here. So yeah, check that out as well.
Yeah, and there's a lot to learn from them and their stories and what they've done. All right, question for the day. Joa Martins asks, what's better for creating hip to shoulder separation, anti-rotation exercises or rotational exercises? It's a good question, and I'm going to kind of probably want to take it more into how do you train concentrically or eccentrically, or both. Concentric would be basically pushing a force. Concentric or eccentric would be resisting the force. Basically, that's a simple way of putting it. So in rotational and creating hip to shoulder separation, of course, there's a big understanding to how to allow the stretch or implement the stretch shortening cycle. And the stretch shortening cycle would be using both the eccentric, concentric force production or movements, but you're actually using the eccentric movement to enhance the concentric movement. So that's what we're doing in hip to shoulder separation. As the hips are coming through, the trunk should be delayed and slightly pulling against or eccentrically loading into it, and then that should enhance the unloading into the trunk tilts and the trunk rotational movement. So yes, doing an eccentrical anti-rotation movement, like say on a med throw, or like if you use a Dynamax ball like we do in the core routine, and someone throws it to you and you catch it off to your side and then you slow it down. So you're resisting that force and then you fire it back. That would be what I would consider an anti-rotation exercise. That would be excellent for someone who's trying to build more hip shoulder separation, because if you have a weak core, how well are you going to resist or build an eccentric load and then really explode into a concentric load? And the core is such a big musculature that we can get a lot of power out of it, and that's the goal here, is the proximal to distal timing, the proximal, leg and core, building the power there and transferring it distally into the arm is really the 3x pitching velocity approach. So anytime we can put the power in the big muscle groups and transfer it up, it's always going to benefit us in velocity. But why don't I let Kevin kind of add on more to this question?
Yeah, I think this is one of those kind of questions where there is no right or wrong answer. I think that you need to use both, okay? So if I'm rotating and I'm using rotational forces, then that's good. But I also need to be able to stabilize that rotation and at some point be able to transfer that energy up the chain. And if I don't do some anti-rotation and eccentric loading of the core, then I'm not going to be able to stabilize that rotation as effectively. And when we're resisting rotation eccentrically or an anti-rotation drill, we're firing the muscles, and they're just kind of sitting there going boom, 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 over firing, firing, firing over and over and over again. So that's just one of the ways that we can really load the system and really stress it out. And so eccentric loading, anti-rotation drill is basically eccentric loading of the core. So we use that around here to just get a little more out of our workouts and just kind of implement that to add into it, and it just makes our training that more effective. So
yeah, and it's increasing force production in those movements. But the more sport specific you can make those eccentric movements to, say if you're working in the core, to your throwing delivery, I would say is highly beneficial. For example, even though we do both, but you just sitting there throwing a medicine ball in a rotational movement like this, not probably going to transfer as well to your delivery as you doing our med throws, which is you actually using a lighter ball, a 2-pound med ball, but big, and you actually going through the same movement patterns of a high velocity pitcher, but implementing an anti-rotation, because what's the purpose of this anti-rotation exercise is to actually improve hip to shoulder separation, because in those throws you're actually working through hip to shoulder separation. So technically it's an exercise, but you're actually going through the exact same movement pattern that we want on the mound and trying to improve speed and loading and unloading through it. So I always like to make it as sports specific as I can, but at the same time too, we'll still go into our lifting program where it's not as sports specific, because we can probably use a heavier load and play with that. We can do it in a little different way. We create some more balance and integrity in the system. But what do you think about how, you know, of course sports specific is important, but how sports specific do you want to be in your training programs?
I mean, hitting the weight's important. We can kind of do just the basic squat and stuff like that. But then when we want to get it, transfer the strength into our skills activity, we have to do some more skill specific work. So once we've got our strength to an adequate level in the weight room, then we have to start adding in things like the med ball throws and stuff like that, more and more and more, and that's going to help us build. We always do it, but as you get closer to your season, when we start to implement more throwing and more skill-specific related activities to make sure that we're getting all that work that we've done in the off-season into our in-season activity. And like I said, with that anti-rotation drill, you're resisting rotation and you're also pushing rotation with your lower half. So we're doing both. So in your delivery, you're using anti-rotation. So yeah, to train that is essential to continue to develop hip to shoulder separation. But don't get just stuck on one thing. I think that's a huge thing. Like guys want to be like, is it this or is it that? It's not this or that, it's all of it. It's the whole approach, and you got to stay with that method, else you're going to get lost and you're going to chase one thing and you're going to end up having a negative effect. Because when you go too much here, this suffers, okay? And that's why we build the program to be a program, not just one thing. So you got to do the whole thing.
That's why we call it the fusion system. It's a fusion of training, hitting every aspect of the high velocity pitcher, not just, you know, an anti-rotational exercise or a eccentric loading exercise, and that's all we're going to do. That's a part of the puzzle. And there's a big puzzle when you're trying to be what I call the best athlete in the world, because the high velocity speeds of, say, someone like Chapman is considered some of the fastest human movements ever recorded in a laboratory. So we're trying to be incredibly impressive athletes here. So it's not going to be one thing, it's going to be a fusion of things. So thanks for a great question. If you'd like to ask your question, go to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, at TopVelocity, hashtag pitching tips. Ask your question, we're going to answer on the show. Also check out the 3X programs if you want to learn more about our programs, our fusion system, our throwing programs. Everything is at TopVelocity.net, and we'll catch you next time. So.